And welcome back, everybody, to week 4, picking it up with part 2 of planning. This is a sample requirements management plan. Remember, don't memorize this. This is just a sample. We've said earlier that a project management is a framework. You have to build your methodology. If you like this approach, it can be used as your methodology, but it doesn't have to be. You have to build a detailed enough methodology, a detailed enough plan that it will succeed. The PMBOK guide is the framework that guides you to everything you need to consider. As I mentioned, I love the what went right. It's well addressed in the book. I would go there and review it. So if I'm collecting requirements, my output becomes this really cool thing, and it's a requirements traceability matrix. Not only do I have my requirements, but I can follow them, I can trace them through to the end, to conclusion. Most projects fail because either the requirements weren't identified or they weren't followed through to the end. Okay, so this is requirements traceability matrix, very important in that regard. This is a sample of what one would look like that you could use at your leisure. Notice they've numbered them. I'd even tie it to the work breakdown structure to make sure I knew who the owner was that was driving this requirement, and of course keep the status of it. Now, after we've collected the requirements, then we want to define scope. What we're trying to do is define a scope statement. That's usually a narrative statement, a paragraph form, usually 7 or 8 sentences, and it will say a couple of things. You will want to list out your I'm not sure my pen's going to do it. Product scope, right? That's that long-term scope as it goes into operations. Your project scope will want to be listed in it. What are you trying to achieve here in your deliverable? You want to put down what is success criteria look like in your scope statement. You want to put down your assumptions and constraints, and you want to write down this is just as important as what's not in the project, what's not in the scope, because later people will try to add stuff and you may have already addressed it. That has happened to me. I've had a group VP come to me and say, Andy, halfway through the project, we need to consider this. Well, sir, at the kickoff, I said this is what's not in the scope and you approved it. And later he came back and said, okay, we'll move on. I got it. But I was able to use that. What's not in the project is as important as what is in the project scope. Here is a sample scope statement. Notice kind of a narrative format. Notice they have exclusions. This would be their version of what's not in the project. This would be success criteria or acceptance criteria, and these are the requirements detailed out in paragraph or narrative form. It continues to discuss the various deliverables. That's what it's about, the requirements for those deliverables. Now, what we're trying to avoid is the term called scope creep. That's where scope gets added along the way, but it's not really part of the project. So say my project is to deliver a really pretty picture frame of a couple, and that was my only requirement. And I didn't ask the sponsor or other stakeholders for clarification. That's a role as a project manager, clarify the scope if I have questions. So what I do is I go out and I build this really ornate frame, or I go to Michael's store and I have a really ornate frame and I have it triple matted and put under glass. None of that was part of the requirements. That's scope creep, where I've added things that really weren't justified or required in the project. We like to talk about scope in this term. If it's not in the work breakdown structure, all right, if it's not, let me write that down, not in the work breakdown structure, that's a requirement. It's not in our project, right? That helps us avoid scope creep, okay? Cute cartoon, take your time, pause and enjoy it, give a giggle. It is worth it. The next process, once I've defined, first I collected the requirements, Then I define the scope statement. Now I'm ready to build that work breakdown structure. So the top of the work breakdown structure is going to have my scope statement in it. That's at the very top. And from there, I'm going to deliberate out what I need to build this deliverable, right? And then I'll further break that down along the way. Okay, so say I'm going to build a bike, right? And my scope statement is to build a bike that's for sale at Walmart, not super high end, but good enough, and kids can just enjoy it around the neighborhood, right? Well, to do that, I'm going to need a front steering mechanism. I'm going to need a frame mechanism, and I'm going to detail that out and what's required to build it. I'm going to need tires, right? I need a front tire, I need a rear tire, and some other things that go with it. And that's how I end up building my scope, my work breakdown structure. It actually looks like an org chart, but it's about requirements from your scope statement on down, detailing out everything you need to build this deliverable. At the bottom of a work breakdown structure, the very lowest level is called the work package. And that will be on a lot of tests, even the PMI type tests. The lowest level of the scope in the work breakdown structure is the work package, right? This is defined in enough detail to estimate what it would cost and how long it would take. Notice what we just tied it to. We just tied the work breakdown structure to your budget in our definition and our schedule. Well, what do I have here? Now I'm thinking scope, schedule, cost, our triple constraint, all brought together, and I can get important clues about it in my work breakdown structure. It starts with scope, but in the end, it's telling me about cost and schedule as well. I will use something called control accounts that will help me add up the costs up the work breakdown structure. So I'll use control accounts so I know where my budget is going. So a good work breakdown structure has, I'll bet, 50 great advantages. It does contain 100% of the deliverables. As I said, if it's not in the work breakdown structure, it's not in your project. That is worth writing it down. That is worth noting, okay? And notice it's not just graphical, I'd say it's a hierarchical format, just like that org chart that we have talked about. That's what your work breakdown structure looks like. Here is a sample one. Here's a birthday cake. If I'm going to make a cake, I need to so level 1 of the work breakdown structure is my scope statement. Level 2 is first I need a cake, and I also need frosting, and I also need toppings on that, and I need candles. Well, to make a cake, then I've got my level 3 of my work breakdown structure. I'm going to need flour, eggs, oil, things, right? Frosting, I'm going to need these things, etc. This is a sample work breakdown structure. It's a good team building event. I bring the whole team together and we go through it and define what we think we're going to need in the work breakdown structure. Remember, if it's not in the work breakdown structure, it is not in your project. Okay. Okay, so here is, again, another version, another view. This is about a house, building a house. So level 1 of the work breakdown structure is really just that scope statement we talked about. Level 2 begins to define out, well, I got to work on the foundation. I need external construction, internal work, including the walls, ceilings, windows, doors, stairs. I would even say plumbing and wiring, right, along the way. The roof would be a separate deliverable to support this overall project deliverable. So would services, oh, they have plumbing there, and yard and access, right? So this is a good work breakdown structure. Remember, the lowest layer of a work breakdown structure is called the work package, okay? Again, another one showing a single family house. This is just level 1 and level 2. You can further define out level 3 and level 4, however far you need to go to build out this scope statement. If it doesn't support your scope statement, it's not part of the scope. Here's another view of the same. This is a kiosk project. I'll let you pause and review that on your own time. This is a best practice. If you look closely at the WBS examples shown, you'll notice that there are no verbs, right? As verbs represent action. And a WBS isn't about action. A WBS is about deliverables, right? Deliverables. You're about delivering it. Your action is going to come in the schedule here in a minute. So creating a good work breakdown structure, here are some rules to that. Just make it look hierarchical. An org chart is one example of that along the way. Here's one for that kiosk item. Again, no need to go through it. Now, with a work breakdown structure, always comes with a work breakdown structure dictionary. You'll notice if we're talking an org chart like this, this is a work breakdown structure. Where's your detail? You don't see any detail. That detail for each step, that detail for user requirements, technical requirements, system design, software development, etc. That detail is here in the work breakdown structure. Who's the owner? What's the deliverable date? What constraints do they have? Is it a milestone, right? Etc. etc. Who needs to be work on that part of the project, etc. This is a great media snapshot. I love this about the course. Again, it is detailed nicely in the book itself. There are various approaches to work breakdown structures. Basically, the only one you need to do is top down. Start at the top in your scope statement and just break it down, right? There's also bottom up approach. It can be used. We've already talked about mind mapping, where you could have the idea at the center and just begin to, with your team, do ideas branched around that, and then do sub-ideas from there, right? You're building out your work breakdown structure. This is that from the mind map, right? If it were a kiosk, you put your main concept here. Well, to have a patient kiosk, what do I really need? Well, I've got to consider marketing, got to tell people about it. I need staff trained that will manage it. I need a patient kiosk. I need locations, right? And you could probably go on from there. I need if it's a patient kiosk, I need, I might consider ADA, right? The Americans with Disabilities Act. I might consider HIPAA, right? Or policy, right? I could go on all day. And this is a starting point to a great mind map. You build it out with your team. So as I said, you start with this idea. First, you come up with some core concepts to develop, and then you further detail those out, and this will turn into your work breakdown structure. These are some great video highlights. I recommend them to you. Okay, for these video highlights, I love Andy Kaufman's work. Jennifer Bridges, I think, is good too. They're all good. Take a moment to review those. Notice that when I say your work breakdown structure is hierarchical, I've been doing it in terms of an organizational chart, but this is also hierarchical. 1 with sub-issues there, and 2 with sub-issues. That's still a hierarchy, right? When I say it's hierarchical. Here is another view of that, detailed out in multiple levels of the hierarchy, right? So it doesn't have to be in an org chart type fashion. This is the WBS dictionary. Remember, I said it's all of the detail that's not in your hierarchy that you just listed out. So you will fill that in, things you will want to know. It's the details. And of course, for Agile, which this course isn't about, but you could use some of that to be considered. You could still do a work breakdown structure, but in Agile, we're actually going to call that backlog. And we're going to refine that backlog all the time. So you remember we had user stories, and those user stories go into a backlog in a priority order, and you pull those into sprints we talked about in previous lessons. And just because you've set a priority doesn't mean you can't change it along the way. So you refine that backlog over time. Okay? Epics are super large stories. You'd want to break those down into useful stories that you can do along the way. One way to do that is called Moscow. That's a way to prioritize. MSCW forms the term Moscow, okay? And using story cards. That's it for this week. Thanks. I'll see you guys online.